So we need to begin by going back to the early 1990s. In fact, the late 1990s, Monty. Let's get our time frame right here. Late 1990s. If we go back to the late 1990s, we remember, Randy, that the American Heart Association was telling Americans that if you're living an inactive lifestyle, if you're really not exercising and you're just what we would call sedentary, you're not doing much, that activity puts you at major risk for heart disease. Now, this was in the late 1990s. John, they always told us that exercise was good for us, and I think most people understand this, but when the American Heart Association says if you're inactive, it's equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in terms of damage to your cardiovascular wellness. This was a big shocker in the late 1990s. And for most people today, Ellen, if we tell them that, they say, my goodness, I would not have known that. So here we have hundreds of millions of adults living their lives, not being very active, being told that this is putting them at big risk for cardiovascular disease. Now, just hold that thought for a second. At the same time, for the previous 100 years, doctors have been telling their patients, if you have arthritis, if you have osteoarthritis, and we'll talk about that tonight, you should do nothing. This is a literal translation of the prescription. You have joint pain, you have osteoarthritis, here's some pain medications, but don't do any exercise. That started in the late 1800s and carried through until the late 1980s. That was the gold standard treatment. Randy, please do not move your body. Why would they say that? The thinking was we're going to wear your joints out and we're going to make things even worse. So the medical treatment for arthritis for over 100 years in America was do nothing. Surprising to hear that, but that was what people were being told. Now, on top of it, the American Heart Association is saying, by the way, doing nothing is going to accelerate aging and kill you prematurely. You'll probably have a fatal heart attack. So we have these sort of two things converging. Now, think about last week. I know you don't know about this, but last week, the journal, the online journal, it's called an open access journal from the American Medical Association. They just published a 24-year study from the Cleveland Clinic on inactivity and mortality rates. And this is a study that looked at adults, 2,400 adult men and women. They did fitness tests, and they said, Randy, let's not take your word on whether you're exercising. Let's do a fitness test on you. And we'll put you on a treadmill and we'll grade you into 4 brackets of low, below average, above average, high for fitness level. Well, they looked at 2,400 adult men and women over this 24-year period, just published last week. They found that those in the low category, which is many Americans actually, not doing much, no formal exercise, no leisure time activities, kind of sitting around doing nothing, compared to those in the above average, were 390% more likely to die. They looked at mortality rates over that 24-year period. And so this is now saying what these scientists, the lead author, a cardiologist from Cleveland Clinic, says, now we can tell people if you're not exercising, it's more dangerous than smoking. So now, if you had to choose smoke a pack of cigarettes every day or don't exercise, you're better off smoking a pack of cigarettes every day if you're an exerciser. I know that sounds backwards. It sounds very counterintuitive. But the point here is that we have many millions of people, John, who don't recognize the lethal effect of living an inactive lifestyle. We're saying it's more dangerous than if you have heart disease. It's more dangerous than having diabetes. It's more dangerous than being a smoker. This is inactivity today in 2018. So how do we exercise? What do we do? We're going to do 3 things tonight. We're going to talk about the things you should know about arthritis, just the basic things to understand this disease. Where does strength training fit in? If we're telling you that you should exercise, but this whole sore joint issue is still prevalent, how does strength training fit into the equation? And what does the recent research tell us about how we can strength train to reduce pain scores? And then lastly, what does a pain-free workout look like? Everyone says, and I'll give you the data from Tufts University, if you are going to strength train, it shouldn't be an excruciatingly painful experience to your joints. You still have the potential to feel good, John. You just need to do that behavior. So we'll break these down into component parts, but the take-home message here is one that we've been told to do nothing, That's not good because it kills us prematurely and accelerates the aging process. And now, as of just last week, they're saying this is worse than smoking, it's worse than heart disease, it's worse than anything that we know. So this is really the modern way to die, unfortunately, in the United States. So, having said that, let's talk about the basics here. When we think about arthritis, there are two basic kinds. There's what we would refer to as degenerative arthritis and then inflammatory arthritis. Inflammatory is an actual inflammatory state. The one that we know most often is rheumatoid arthritis. About 4 million Americans affected by rheumatoid arthritis. This is where your body attacks the cartilage. It attacks itself. It starts breaking down the cartilage, and the joints become inflamed and painful. The other one is degenerative, and the arthritis that is most prevalent there is osteoarthritis. This is more than 80% of the arthritis in America, Randy. So it's basically more than 8 out of 10 people have osteoarthritis. When we talk about arthritis, that's a gradual degeneration of the cartilage. It's associated with aging, it's associated with lifestyle, and there is a genetic component here too. So this isn't 100% lifestyle, but it is mainly lifestyle related. So we have these two types. We have degenerative and inflammatory. We're going to talk mainly about the degenerative because that's the one that's so common today in the United States. Even throughout the world, it's much more common. Now the breakdown, the hallmark of the disease is cartilage is breaking down. That's the cushioning between joints. It's the spongy sort of hard tissue that is on the articular surface between the femur and the tibia, and any joint, which is where two bones come together, we have what we call cartilage. And it's the soft, slippery stuff that allows joints to move and function. When that starts to break down and becomes rough and jagged is where you get pain with movement. The worst case scenario here is where you have no cartilage and you literally have bone on top of bone. We've all heard of that term probably before, bone on bone. Super painful. May as well jab a knife into your joint because that's what it feels like. So this is the hallmark of the disease. It's the breakdown of cartilage between joints over time associated with aging. Now, when I walk, I'm a little under 200 pounds. So if I walk, there's this thing that we call a ground reaction force, Tina. When I walk, each time I take my foot up and put it down, the heel makes contact with the ground, right? There's weight distributed up through the leg into the pelvis, the femur, up through the vertebral column. That's called the ground reaction force. 1 pound of weight, Monty, translates into 3 pounds of force when you're walking. So take my weight times 3. If I just go take a walk, I'm generating 600 pounds of force on that femur head, on that femur and that tibia, on the ankle, on the vertebral column. So there's a multiplication of force here when we move. Just a simple walk does this. When you're going downstairs, it's a 6-fold multiplication. So when I simply walk down the stairs, it's 1,200 pounds of force on all those weight-bearing joints. So this is where we see over time extra weight can be an issue when we have osteoarthritis because I'm ramping up the force on those joints. Running is also about 6. So you always hear, should I run, should I not run? Running can be super painful for people that have arthritis because we're really cranking up that ground reaction force. So this is just normal response to movement in the human body. So having said that, what should we know really if we say, okay, cartilage is breaking down, arthritis can get to the point where there's bone on bone and it is crazy painful. There are no drugs to delay the progression of arthritis. There are drugs to delay the progression of rheumatoid arthritis. That's a whole different category. That's an autoimmune disease. So if you have rheumatoid arthritis, we can slow that down a little bit. But there's nothing to slow down the progression of osteoarthritis, the common one, unless we look to what we would describe as lifestyle medicine. That's changing your exercise, changing your activity, changing your diet. So lifestyle medicine, there's a lot of promise. So let's talk a little bit about lifestyle medicine and what role that can play. So going back to strength training here. Why is strength training an issue with arthritis? Well, think about those ground reaction forces. As your muscles get weaker, anything that gets past the muscle goes to the joint. And so your muscles are essentially shock absorbers. You're walking down the street, We call that dissipating that ground reaction force. So you're walking down the street, every step you take, Rita, the muscles of the lower leg, the upper leg, the vertebral column, they're all functioning to dissipate that ground reaction force. As they get weaker, think of it as the shock absorber is wearing out, it's getting smaller. Remember the days when we actually thought about shock absorbers in cars and we thought, oh, I need to change my shock absorbers. We don't think about that anymore. But I remember having old cars that were near the end, and it was a rough ride going down the road because the shock absorbers were in terrible shape and I couldn't afford new shock absorbers. So this same thing happens to your body. As those get weaker, you feel it more in all of your weight-bearing joints. Now, do muscles get weaker as we age? Of course they do. This starts in about our mid-30s. We call it sarcopenia. It's the age-related loss of muscle. So it starts in the mid-30s, it continues, and it accelerates every decade of life. So in your 40s, you lose muscle faster, 50s even faster, 60s even faster. In fact, one study of adults in their 80s found that 10 days of bed rest of complete inactivity was equivalent to a year of muscle loss if you're in your mid-80s. This is why physicians are so crazy to get people out of bed, moving, standing, getting them ambulatory instead of laying around the way it used to be decades ago. So muscle loss accelerates, Ellen, as we get older, and we know that the weaker those muscles get, the more my joints feel, the more of that force goes right to the cartilage. All right, with me? Now, the process of sort of cartilage breakdown is normal, so it's not like this is some sort of unusual, unhuman thing. It is a normal occurrence, and it's kind of like a tire on your car. John, if you drive 50,000 miles with your car, you expect the tire is going to get a little bit thinner eventually over time. That's normal. That's to be expected. Same thing with cartilage. It's expected that it will get used, you're moving, and it gets a little bit thinner over time. So we're not anticipating that we can keep your cartilage where it was when you were 20. Our goal here is to reduce the force on the cartilage, reduce the wear and tear by having good shock absorbers, and to reduce the amount that it has to deal with by having those good shock absorbers in place. So we're not saying, hey, this is the never break down cartilage program. That's not, no one can do that, and we can't do it, and lifestyle medicine can't do it. But what we can do, offset those forces with better shock absorbers and decrease the pain, because anything that makes it through is painful. So we want to minimize the amount of force that makes it through to the cartilage tissue. Now, I said that for 100 years, Tina, doctors said, Tina, you have arthritis. Just go home and live your life. Don't do anything. Ironically, that was the gold standard of treatment. So go do nothing. Well, it wasn't until the 1970s or so that scientists started to evaluate, does exercise make a difference here? Will it help with the health of the cartilage? What will it do to my muscles, and what benefits are there? Well, here's what we discovered. First, we started to study aerobic activity, walking, biking, jogging, things of that nature. And we realized that when you look at people that do that, they do just a little better than people that do nothing in terms of pain scores. All right, we're looking at sort of daily function, how they feel, how they're doing. And then the conclusion after about 15, 20 years of looking at aerobic activity was, well, it doesn't really help that much. So we're not going to worry about telling people to go take a walk, because maybe it's a 5% decrease in pain scores. It's not that big of a deal. Then in the early 90s, scientists started to look at strength training. They found, oh, this is interesting. If people strength train, pain scores go down substantially more than they do when they're walking. But still not too significant, maybe 20% reduction. Meaningful increase, but still in the totality of it, Monty, it wasn't racking up to be anything too spectacular. People were still using a truckload of pain medications to get through their life with osteoarthritis. It wasn't until the mid-90s a scientist by the name of Miriam Nelson at Tufts University said, you know what, we've done research here before where we took senior citizens and we trained them in her term, intensely, pretty rigorously, senior citizens, and we found that we can triple their strength in a couple months. But when we did that, Ellen, it was a pretty demanding workout. It wasn't lifting soup cans. It wasn't sitting on a chair, lifting your leg like this 14 times. Not that that's bad, but it's really not stimulating muscle adaptation. So that, her colleague, Bill Evans, at the time, he's now at Duke teaching there, but had done this in the 80s, and she thought, you know what, Dr. Evans was successful. Let's try a more rigorous strength workout and see what happens if we push them a little harder and get a little more muscle fatigue. So she did that 16-week study. She had 49 participants, adult men and women, and what she got was mind-blowing for the time. That was published in 2001 in the Journal of Rheumatology. They had a 43% decrease in pain scores in 4 months and a 71% increase in strength of the quadriceps. That's the muscles on the front of the leg. This, guys, this is the biggest shock absorber for lower body ground reaction dissipation, both for the hip and the knee. So they get this big increase in strength in the quadriceps in 4 months. They get this huge reductions in pain scores. She publishes it. This then becomes sort of the template for future research. And so if I fast forward to today, what the Arthritis Foundation will tell you is that you should always strength train when you have arthritis. You should always work your whole body. You should always work through a full joint range of motion. You should move slow and control. It sounds like the MedFitness workout, right? You should always do these things, and in the absence of those, your pain scores will likely be higher. They're not saying don't be active. Yes, go do aerobic activity. We need to do that for a lot of good reasons. But if we really want to have less pain so that you can then go do the things that we know will literally save your life, strength training needs to be the foundation. And so I'm going to quote Dr. Nelson here. She says, when it comes to strength training, work around the pain. Literally work around it. Not skip the strength workout, work around the pain. So what does that look like? How, Randy, can you have a pain-free workout if you've got some significant arthritis going on? How do we do that? So let's look at that real quickly here. Osteoarthritis I didn't mention. That tends to affect 1 or 2 joints in your body. Knee is super common. Could be hip. You could have some arthritis in the spine. But that tends to affect 1, maybe 2 joints. Rheumatoid arthritis, these inflammatory diseases tend to affect your body as a whole. So you might have pain throughout in multiple joints and other organ systems as well. But we're speaking specifically about osteoarthritis here in this context. So let's look at how do we have a pain-free workout. So you guys with me so far? We're trying to beef up the size of your shock absorbers so that we offset that ground reaction force, which is just normal with movement. There's no way to get around it. We have gravity on Earth, there's ground reaction force. We won't have that when we work out on the moon, but that's a different workout. So, okay. So what does the pain-free workout look like? Well, first and foremost, when we put Rita on a machine, I'm identifying what we would refer to as the pain-free range of motion. So when we look at the function of a muscle, it does 2 things, right? It shortens and it lengthens. It moves in 2 directions. We call this a sliding filament theory. This is how muscles contract. So I want Rita to stretch, to lengthen that muscle as far as she can comfortably stretch it. I also want her to shorten it, contract it as far as she can comfortably contract it for every major muscle and joint in her body. So we first establish what is the pain-free range of motion. So that'll determine where do I adjust this movement arm? Where is the seat? Where is the back? Do I use a pad? Do I use a pin here? Do I set a hole? We customize to get the pain-free range of motion for that person, because as a rule, when you're working out, the goal is not to say, you know what, let's suffer through some excruciatingly difficult movement patterns and then just hope that things get better down the road. That's not the goal. The workout can be pain-free from a joint standpoint. Now, I'm not talking about your muscles, because that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that in a second. Everyone knows how good the MedFitness workout feels, right? But we establish what those are, and that's what the trainers are doing in terms of managing their chart, saying the machine, and everyone's different, Tina, right? From the next person to the next person. Height, body size, everything varies. So we're identifying the pain-free range of motion for you so you can exercise, Randy, and not have, you know, excruciating pain as your exercises. That's our first order of business. Now, most of the time when we do that, it's not hard to do. You know, whether it be our experience and or just knowing what's going on, it's not tough to figure out what doesn't hurt you. That's fairly straightforward, fairly doable. And we're always asking, how does it feel? How did you feel? How are you feeling in terms of your joints during an exercise? The next alternative is what we would refer to as a time static hold, Monty. So some people do have significant enough discomfort to where we have to not move, John. We just have to do what we call a static hold. Now we might have done that with you for a while, didn't we? We might have done that a while back. So this is what people might refer to as isometric exercise. You're not moving. You lift the weight up, whatever the exercise is, and you just hold it in one position. Now historically, scientists felt like that was okay, but we didn't gain a lot of strength through the full range because we weren't moving through the full range. Now in a perfect world, Randy, we always want to move as much as we can move. We call it full joint motion. But if we can't, if it's just too painful, we're not going to have you go up and down and have your knees on fire on every repetition. So we do this static hold. It can be done on any joint. We do it on hips, backs, knees, you name it, shoulders. And that allows us to fatigue the muscles involved in that musculature without any movement. All right, now the key here is that it has to be hard. What we don't want to do, Alan, is say, hey, your shoulder hurts, so let's make it super easy. What happens then? We're going back to what they did in the 70s, and we're having people lift soup cans. Easy is okay, it just doesn't benefit the tissues of that joint, the tendons, the ligaments, the cartilage, the bone, the muscle, everything. So the time static hold is a technique that I think a couple other of you guys have experienced before, where we just hold it in one position. That's another technique for working around the pain, as Dr. Nelson says. The other technique is reduced range of motion, where we just shorten the distance that you're moving in. You might move through 2/3 of the bottom range of motion, we call that the bottom turnaround, or you might, I think you've done this, Monty, through 2/3 of the top range, where we shorten the stroke and we start higher up and you go through the top range and we work the muscle there. Again, beneficial if it's demanding. Not beneficial if we get the weights really light and you're just kind of going through it to go through it. Oh, well, this feels great because I feel nothing. My muscles feel fresh as a daisy. My joints feel great. That's not benefiting you because remember, your system functions as a whole, right? When I train your muscles, I'm also training your bones. I'm training the fascia, I'm training the cartilage, I'm training the tendons, I'm training the ligaments. You don't have to have the tendon workout. There's no such thing as the ligament workout. Work the muscles. They're the gateway to all those other tissues. So if I'm going to benefit the cartilage and the bone, etc., I've got to work the muscles hard. So when I do these techniques, it's still about working hard. It's not about making it easy. It's about fatiguing the muscle without joint pain. So we're separating those two. Your quadriceps could be on fire, right? They could be, as they often do, feel like they're on fire, but the joint really doesn't hurt. I go through my leg extension. Unfortunately, I don't really have any discernible knee arthritis, so I can work hard, good range of motion. Quadriceps feel like they're going to explode, they're on fire, but the joint feels great. And then I'm done and it's all over. So thankfully, it's only 1 to 2 minutes a couple of days a week. So we're looking for doing that when we do the 2/3 range of motion. And then sometimes, people really like this one, we just skip the exercise. Now, wouldn't that be counterproductive? As I say, hey John, just skip that one. Actually, no. Sometimes you have to skip an exercise to have a productive workout. Well, how does this work? Let's say you skip knee extension, which is the one that everyone loves, right? You sit down, your leg goes out, so this really burns those quadriceps, right? That's a tough exercise. Let's say we just skipped it because you have some advanced arthritis in the knee. Even the static hold is bugging you. Even the short range is bugging you. How are we going to do this? Well, the good news is muscles can be worked two ways. You can work it directly, which is how the leg extension works. It works just the quadriceps directly. Or I can work it indirectly by doing a movement that also engages that muscle, but other muscles at the same time. What does that? Leg press is a good example. When you push Randy on leg press, you are also engaging the quadriceps. You're engaging the hips and the hamstring, a lot of muscles all at once. So I can still make your quadriceps stronger even if I don't work them directly. So there's always two paths to get to a muscle, thankfully. Not just one door, but two doors we can walk through to target it. So sometimes, and we have plenty of folks that do this now for different exercises, we're just skipping that one today, Tina. We're pulling it off for the next month, 2 months. Sometimes we pull it off permanently. Sometimes we take it off for a month, it comes back, and you've improved the strength of that joint so we can go back to it. So it is a viable option to skip an exercise. We're not being lazy, we're just getting it indirectly with different exercises, okay? So what have I really said here? We've come a long way when it comes to understanding arthritis. We used to tell people to do nothing intuitively. Doesn't that seem wrong, right? I mean, you don't have to be a medical scientist to know that go home, sit down, and just wait to die, right? That's basically what it is when they say don't do anything. So we know that that's wrong. We know that you can strength train. We know that the best evidence today says the best improvement in pain scores come from strength training, and that we have to do it because we were just told at this lecture from that study 24 years long from the Cleveland Clinic, lead cardiologist, lead author of that study says we have to treat inactivity like it's a disease. You have to get a prescription for it and tell someone to go get that behavior. So we know that we need to be active. So I need to make you strong enough, Randy, so you can be active to avoid some of the discomfort associated with osteoarthritis. And of course, we're not even talking about, folks, the benefits of strength training alone, right? How many diseases, by the way, $64,000 question, how many diseases do we know weak muscles are related to? Any idea how many chronic diseases the risk goes up when you lose muscular strength? Strength is a biomarker. It's at the top of the list of about a dozen biomarkers that predict mortality and morbidity. How many diseases, guys? Take a guess. At least 12. We can say heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, chronic fatigue syndrome, dementia, Alzheimer's. There's a long list of diseases linked to just losing muscle. So we know we need to strength train for the direct benefits, but now we're saying, hey, I'm one of those 50 million people with arthritis. This is also going to help me to have less pain just for quality of life purposes. But then Rita can actually go out and garden. She can actually go take a walk, whatever it is that she likes to. She can get up and down with the grandkids, all those things that improve quality of life because I am stronger and I have the muscles offsetting that ground reaction force, okay? So what is the final message here, guys? It's simple. We should, if we don't have arthritis today, strength train as a preventive measure so that you can stay active and beat the odds based on these data that we know about mortality and inactivity. And if you do have arthritis, strength train so that you can decrease pain scores enough so you can go take the walk, you can go do the bike ride. I can't tell you how many people come into MedFitness and when they first come to us and we ask them about what they're doing, you guys are in the minority. Most people are doing next to nothing. They really are doing next to nothing. So the goal of gaining strength is to be able to do what I want to do long term. And by the way, if you had to invest your time, right, which one comes first? Strength training or aerobic activity? If you had limited time, you said, hey, I'm just going to invest a little bit of my week in one behavior, which behavior would we suggest? Why would we say that? Why would we say strength training?
Because on a lot of the machines, your heart rate goes up too, so you're actually getting aerobic exercise.
There's some cardiovascular benefits to your blood vessels in your heart from strength training. That's true, Ellen. Any other idea, John? Yeah, right.
When you're doing strength training, what you're doing is you're forming the building blocks of all your muscle strength that are getting stronger so you can facilitate all other type of activities.
That's the answer, right? Hear what he said. Strength training leads to physical, I mean, Ellen's right too, because it's beneficial, but strength training leads to physical activity, general physical activity, biking, walking. We would usually loosely refer to that as aerobic activity if we look at how we describe this, cardiovascular activity. Go walk, bike, swim, jog, hike, whatever it is you do, go do that. Those are activities that are good. But if you strength train, you are exponentially more likely to do that as you age. If you do aerobic activity, you are not exponentially more likely to strength train. That goes down actually over time. So as you get weaker and weaker and weaker, that walk that you took when you're 55 is a lot harder at 65. It's really tougher at 75. And you know what? You get to the point where you don't do it because it's too demanding to do. This is from Dr. Evans in the early 80s, he said, we think ourselves into aging in America. We feel that now that I'm whatever it is, 60, 65, 70, 80, 90, now that I'm at that age, I'm at the age where I'm too old to do things. We think our way into disease in the United States. So I'm saying, yes, despite the fact that we own a strength training studio, that yes, strength train first, because there's a dozen benefits there for you, but then that leads to more active lifestyles long term. It solidifies the ability to go do the things that you like doing. The reverse is true with general activity, right? People get weaker, they stop doing things because they think they shouldn't, and usually they can't because their VO2 max is down, strength is down, muscular endurance is down. It becomes what we would call sarcopenic, to the point where you now have to go live in an assisted environment because you're too weak to live in your own home. Think about that. My grandparents were in their 90s when they finally moved into an assisted environment, and my grandfather fought it like there was no tomorrow. He was 95. John and Rita, how long, you don't have to answer this, but think about your home and how beautiful it is in the community. How long do you want to stay there? Probably as long as possible, right? You're not saying, well, in a year we'll go somewhere else. No, so, and benefit, enjoy, relish it as long as possible, right? You get that by staying independent and non-sarcopenic, not becoming weak and dysfunctional, where you can't do these things that are so vital and so meaningful as we age. So strength train to prevent it, strength train to reduce pain score so you can go live the life that you want to live. On that note, we're going to do a drawing.